People are like, oh my gosh, you can eat those. It's like, yes, not only can we eat those, but for 10,000 years, North America indigenous people have relied on the quercus and the acorn nut as a primary carbohydrate for their sustenance for the entire year. So the acorn harvest happens, not the only nut, large, just like squirrels, that made up for large portions of the diets for indigenous communities.
Welcome to the Wild Herbs Podcast, where we unpack and uncover the healing properties of wild herbs so you can heal naturally with the plants beneath your feet. I am your host, April Punsalan, wild untamed plant lady, also a botanist, an ethnobotanist, and herbalist dedicated to teaching you how to heal with plants. If you want to learn edible and medicinal plants, you are in the right place, my friend. So I'm super excited for you to learn from Lisa Rose today. She is an author of multiple books on foraging and foraging in the Midwest, and she even has a book on urban foraging, which I recommend. She is an anthropologist and an ethnobotanist and a forager who researches and writes and teaches about wild plant foraging and herbal medicine. Lisa brings years of ethnobotanical expertise and lived experience, and she travels across the world. And today she's joining us from England. She spent time in Central and South America, Asia, and Europe. And through her work, she helps everyone from curious beginners to experienced herbalists reconnect with the healing plants growing in their own backyards and communities. And so we're very blessed to be able to hear from Lisa today and to learn from her. And I know you're going to enjoy this podcast episode as much as I am. So Lisa, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us and your lived experience with these plants and place.
Thank you for having me today, April. I'm excited to be here and talk about my favorite things, which are plants and building joy around the natural world around us.
Yes. Amen to that. So you have a lot of lived experience and this gift of sharing. Can you explain or tell us, how did you get started? How did you know it was plants for you, or when did they first start speaking to you?
Well, I'm originally from the Midwest. I was born in Flint, Michigan. So when you mentioned Urban Foraging, that was the most recent book that I've published. It came out of my connection to not just an urban experience, but where I grew up was on the west side of Michigan, along the lake shore of Lake Michigan. And before we joined the podcast, for our listeners, we had a bit of a side chat and how I shared how much the Great Lakes impacted my sense of place and my understanding of ecology. And as a young girl, I was lucky enough to be able to grow up in the sand dunes of Lake Michigan alongside this vast body of fresh water. And we also were chatting about sassafras, which is one of my, I would say, kindred spirit plants. Sassafras is all along the lakeshore dune of West Michigan, or it's found through the Northeast as south, generally as south as Virginia, Tennessee-ish. It kind of peters out there further south. But when I look back, my upbringing, I was lucky enough for economy's sake that my mother did a great deal of canning. So we had a large garden, did a lot of canning, everything from string beans to tomatoes to peaches. I'm not the biggest green bean fan because of that. God love my mother. But as well, we did a lot of canning of the wild Concord grapes that had just been feral along our hedgerow and along the backside of our home, as well as my mother used the crab apples and the feral apple trees that were also on our property. She foraged. We gathered wild asparagus, the mushrooms, morels in the springtime. So again, this was from a place of economy. It wasn't because it was a trend. It wasn't because I grew up in the 80s, 70s, and 80s. It wasn't because there was social media or there was this desire to share boutique foodways. Rather, this was just something that had been passed down through our families as a way of living. So it comes twofold. I think when you asked how I knew I was a plant person, part of it was part of my upbringing. We moved from Flint to the city to the west side of the state in the late 70s, early 80s, and always did have family back in the city. But again, being in that natural world and in such an area with such diversity of plants and such unique ecology of the Great Lakes, that's just in my DNA. And so while my land ethos is based heavily in regenerative agriculture and local food, it's also very connected with the water systems wherever I go.
And so you have this connection with water. Do you feel that the water, like giving thanks to the water, is just important? We talk a lot about giving gratitude to the earth when we forage and paying respect to the earth. How do you think we're doing with giving love to the water?
Great question. Well, first and foremost, our bodies are what, 90% water? Our mass is largely made up of watery substance, right? And I think that when we consider healthy ecosystems and as local food, organic food systems, regenerative agriculture, we tend to think primarily of the land. We don't always don't always include an ecosystems approach to those teachings and understand the impact in general of what agriculture has on our waterways. In fact, in the Great Lakes, specifically in Lake Michigan, about 3/4 of the pollutants that are affecting Lake Michigan currently come from agricultural runoff. And that's historically largely also heavy industrial, turn of the 20th century industrial pollutant, lots of heavy metals and whatnot. But more currently, right now, it is runoff from our agricultural systems. And from my point of view, having grown up alongside such a precious resource, the Great Lakes should be one of the UNESCO's World Heritage Sites. We should really have, when you ask if we give reverence to our waterways, everything from the creeks that feed into the rivers, that feed into the Great Lakes, that feed into our oceans, those are the lymphatic system of the earth. And just as we consider the lymphatic plants, whether it's mullein or just any of the plants we might use as in herbalism for our bodies and understanding what role the lymphatic system has, these waterways are the lymphatic system of our earth. And that's something that at this stage in my career, bridging that and having us have that more in our awareness is very important to me. So starting with that sense of place, when I bring people along on a plant walk, one of my grounding exercises is to consider where the source of water is for you, where the source, and if we're lucky enough to have any water come out of a tap, that's a moment to give thanks, regardless of, is it through an osmosis system? There's a lot of people in the world that have zero access to any water, let alone water from a tap. Again, being from Flint, Michigan, this is very near and dear to my heart. If you've understood any of the water crisis that they've had in the city. So that's, without me going on a side tangent, because we're here to talk about plants, it's always coming back to looking at that full system of the ecology, that relationship between the water helping our wetland plants, our wetland ecology. How do we build up even our garden systems, reclaim the rainwater that falls? How do we become stewards of that system? That's a really important thing that I think all of us, as in the space of teaching about plants, teaching about foraging and regenerative agriculture, we do need to elevate that role of the water system and the hydrology in the conversation.
Yes, really well said. Really, really well said. When I was a botanist for the Forest Service, there was always a hydrologist. There'd be an anthropologist, a botanist, a wildlife biologist, and a hydrologist. But the hydrologist is so important. It's just as important as the botanist, or just as important as a wildlife biologist. So I love that you weave that piece in with your work and foraging, and that when you're doing plant walks, you're bringing people back to the water, and to just blessing the water. Like you said, giving gratitude for the water when it comes out of your tap. That consciousness and awareness is so important. And knowing that our thoughts can change the structure of the water is so fascinating to me. And one thing you may enjoy hearing is when I got to go to Colombia and spend time with the Kogi and the Wiwa, and they can read the water. And in some water sources, they don't even go into them. There's so much respect and reverence for the water, they won't even swim in the water. But they say that before you enter the water, to have really good thoughts. Like, don't go into water with negative thoughts.
That is something cross-culturally that exists. It exists cross-culturally. So I think that when I think of the Celtic traditions here and some of the old Druid rituals and whatnot, like that, and that carry forward in a lot of the traditions here in the UK, spirit wells. Do you even think in a more Judeo-Christian tradition where you do have baptism, holy waters, and mikvahs, like those, or in the Yucatan between the Maya, even in the Aztec, there is a relationship too, and with that role of water and the water's ability to heal and bless and restore. And again, I think that there's a human knowing and a human knowledge around the importance of that. And I do love how you did bring it back to very practical applications and being in the city as well. It's like I've done across my career a lot of different work with city groups. And sometimes it's hard. Sometimes for those that come into my class, they have a very binary perception of where nature exists. It's not here in the city, it's away from us. So it's a very other type approach. And I think bringing that closer and nearer to, and again, starting with our own physical ecology, and there's an opportunity to bring that binary approach to be more dimensional and to get that connection made where we are connected to the natural systems in the city.
Definitely. So you said that you lead foraging walks and you've led them in New York City. Most listeners, I believe, forage on the Wild Herb podcast show. So I would love to hear and to feel like I am starting one of your foraging walks with you. If that's okay.
No, that's super fun. It's funny, I've never actually done that in a virtual setting. This will be really interesting. But it's totally doable.
Okay.
And regardless, and this is very portable. And so this practice has come, I'd say, to fruition probably across 30 years. I'd say this is taken shape of how I first found myself and understand where am I, right? So I've been asked to teach all over the world, and sometimes I only have a few hours to really arrive, ground, have a sense of awareness, right? And so for somebody like me, I can be very like cerebral, and so even just emotionally, how do I connect to where I'm at? And then I think even before we joined our podcast, even asking to be, if I'm teaching, if I'm just even going out on my own as well, it's like how I do ask spirit to be a clear channel for what I'm to learn in the space that we're on. Yeah. And I don't always say that out loud. If it's a group of politicians, I'm like, let's set up that frame with them. But absolutely, as we go into conversation, to be supported and be the best communicator on behalf of the expertise that we have. And then also to be able to be receptive as well, to be able to offer what people in our presence might want to learn from that space that's around us, right? So that grounding, and then very practically, beyond the spiritual, very practically, to get really clear of where I'm at. So I had mentioned that at first, some of the first things is to really get clear on where north is. It sounds kind of silly, but really ground where are my cardinal directions, north, south, east, and west, right? As a gardener, I know that's going to direct how the plants are going to grow across space. Like if I'm going to plant a garden, I'm not going to put it underneath the shade of trees. I don't want to orient it to the most south face, being from the north, especially. I want to be able to maximize the sunlight. So I'm always thinking of, if I'm a plant, where will north be? And so where will south be, and east and west, right? So really grounding myself in those cardinal directions, because that's from there is going to cascade what might be distributed as a plant across the landscape. Another major feature I want to be aware of is the water system. What major rivers are flowing across the space? Even if I'm teaching at a library, whether I'm driving in or taking a bus or coming in by train, I start to ping, not only just looking at my maps that I might have access to, but spatial awareness. Where is the water flowing and how is it coming across as I approach my destination to forage or to live or to teach my class, right? So again, really keying in, and this is a good time to note, to really connect to all my senses, right? Not just visual senses, but smell. When we start to smell, I always like to tell people to smell with our mouths open. It actually allows olfactory experience. When we smell with our mouths slightly open, it brings the air across our tongues so we had a massive thunderstorm today. And after I went for a short walk in the thunderstorm, I took that deep breath of air in and I could breathe it in. And I was like, it smells like worms. And you know how it smells like worms after a rainstorm, right?
Yeah, like the earth. Yeah.
It's full of petrichor, right? There was lightning as well. To get that sensory and to engage all of our systems, right? And to open our ears as well so we can start to listen to how the landscape is around us. Start to listen to the road noise that might exist, or we might be able to hear the rustle of the wind through the pine trees, right? And we might be able to hear, are there birds? Are there no birds? Are there insects? And that's going to vary across time and across the time of the year. And folks are going to be like, what's this got to do with foraging? And I'd say it's got everything to do with foraging. In fact, the absence of engaging these systems, engaging with the ecosystem around us by way of all of our faculties, can actually result in a really tragic misidentification of a plant, right? Which happened to me just recently this week. I was in a forest that wasn't new to me up towards on the mainland of England. And it was a forest that felt really familiar to me. It was sandy soil, mixed hardwood forest. It had beech trees. It had oak trees. It had the pines. It looked like a forest from Western Michigan. I had said to my partner that I was with, as we were walking through the woods, I said, gosh, this feels like home to me. This feels like my childhood home. I didn't have my eyeglasses on. And in the distance, I saw what looked like, I was like, why is that mullein? Why is mullein over there in bloom right now? And I rushed over to it about 30 yards away, and I got really close to it. And I was like, this is a really odd mullein. Didn't have my glasses on, and I wasn't really grounded. I thought I was grounded in place. And I'm glad that I actually kind of paused, because I looked at it, I was like, this isn't right. And then I touched it and I smelled it. I'm like, I didn't have my phone on me, so I asked my partner to take a couple pictures of different plant parts and whatnot. And I said, I'll look at it later. Continued on our walk. He pings me later with the images. It's like, hey, forager, how about some foxglove for you? And it's interesting because energetically, as I got up to that plant, there was a visceral, like, I felt it. And I was just like, this is so bizarre. Foxglove wasn't in bloom. It had some buds, but it wasn't far enough along for me to be able, and I'm not familiar, to be honest, with foxglove in my woods that I am connected to, right? And so I was like, oh, I was projecting. I'm like, these are my woods. Like, my woods don't have foxglove in large stands. People put foxglove in their gardens, right? They weren't in my woods. It wasn't in my awareness. And so I was so quick to make this judgment. And then I was confused because it's too early for mullein anyway. But my point being with that story is to not engage with all senses, the importance to engage with senses. And even somebody that is able to identify and suss out and key out botanical bits. So I was like, is that comfrey? No, it's not comfrey. These are jagged edge leaves. Like, I was like doing all the things in my head. These errors can still exist. So from a beginner forager perspective, I don't share that to also scare somebody.
Right.
There's a real importance, again, of grounding and an importance of using our faculties and our senses, of knowing where we are. And then, most importantly, have reverence for plants that we don't know. Because
Mhm.
in this case, this is one of those type 1 errors, right? You got 2 plants that cause type 1 errors. Well, I'd say one significant one is poison hemlock. You run up to poison hemlock, right? You think it's Queen Anne's lace or sweet cicely or wild carrot when it's small. And if you're handling it quite a bit, that has a lot of ability to transmit through our physical hands, right? Digitalis similarly.
Yeah.
Can't say if it is as quick or is not quick because I've never tested both of those side by side on my person.
I know, we don't wanna do that, and that's a humbling lesson too when that happens, and that's happened to me before not having my glasses now that as I'm 47 too, and when I see some plants, I'm like, "Whoa," like, if I assume it's something from afar, I cannot do that. I have to really take my time, where before when I was in my early 20s, I could though, I could see really, really well. But I like what you're saying about attuning with your senses because I think, and I would love to hear how you feel about this, that when you really tune into the landscape, then the plants tune into you and the earth tunes into you, and you may see a plant that you wouldn't have seen. Like things can be revealed to you when you're more aware, and that awareness of just sense of place and where you're at and connection and gratitude for where you're at instead of just walking into a forest and grabbing a plant and putting it in a basket and walking out.
I appreciate that you bring that up because I believe that because my senses were engaged, and in some ways, not having my glasses on does heighten, I rely more on other faculties.
Mhm.
And because also it's like I do have that prudence of not handling or not cutting back or not putting it in my basket and taking it away and taking pictures first. So that's also something for beginner
I
foragers,
like that.
right? And it's like taking lots of pictures. Now, then frequently the next question is, well, how do you feel about the current state of digital phone recognition?
Mhm.
And using the same example, my partner, he'd sent the images through a couple of the apps, right? And the AI lenses. And he's like, I'm pretty sure it's common foxglove. I said, I hear you. I would like to see different pictures and a bit more closely because this plant specifically was in between grow. I would like to see a mature plant with a more formed bulb. And meanwhile, I opened up a couple of my resources, like here being in the UK, the Royal Horticulture Society is a really good one to rely on. In the United States, the Missouri Botanic Society's got a really great digital web presence for its botanic guides, USDA plant guides, where you then also have distribution ranges as well. Because then I'm not as familiar with the distribution of different plants in the UK. We have lots of different microclimates. But again, like for me in this whole sussing things out, the climate, it's been really hot here. So the growing season's off. I don't know the distribution exactly of where things might be. I can't take things for granted. So again, even as somebody that has a tremendous amount of experience in one bioregion, I engage with this framework of due diligence before I would ever leave with that plant in my basket, right?
Yeah.
It's like if I thought it was digitalis, I would go back and only gather the plant. There's a ton of it, so I would be curious, maybe the root, but I would wear gloves, right? So from that perspective, grounding, understanding the features,
Okay.
understanding and the different type of soils. Of course, those features in the city are going to be a little different. Teaching in Central Park, then we start to talk about as well where I'm at or understanding, but from a place-based perspective, two sides of the same coin, permission to be in a space and to gather. So of course, first and foremost, well, again, it's the same, different side of the same coin. Do I have legal permission to be in a place?
Right. Yeah. But it's good to start in your backyard. And I really like what you said in the beginning of connecting in just because you don't live in a beautiful area with lots of green space, you can still connect in deeply with the nature in your yard or wherever you are. And you wrote that book, Urban Foraging. What was one of your favorite species that you covered in that book that maybe was that you hadn't connected really deeply with before, but you connected with kind of during the writing of that book? To truly heal your body, you have to connect with the wild herbs beneath your feet. Not mail order herbs, not trending herbs, but the herbs that meet you right where you are right now. In the Wild Herb Academy membership, I teach you how to transform your health using common wild herbs with simple, effective recipes that you can make at home. I diffuse 30 years of learning wild herbs into high-quality videos, PDFs, recipes, plant activity sheets, and so much more, so you have no choice but to learn. If your heart says yes to living in rhythm with the earth and nature, I welcome you with open arms. Stay wild, stay human. If you're ready to reclaim your health, I welcome you into the Wild Herb Academy membership. The doors are open now, my friend. I hope to see you.
With urban foraging, that it's interesting because I did my field guides first. And that really, again, is very tactical and a very grounding. Again, framework is really clear. And when we do, and from my own perspective as a teacher, full stop, you mentioned the individual accountability. It's like full stop. If somebody's in a park or a park system, to be really clear on what that might mean for them gathering. So whether there's risk to the plant population, that's an adjacent thing that is a requirement to understand plant populations and impact.
Yeah.
And so for urban foraging, for me, I felt and feel the democratization of information. While I'm an applied academic, I don't view myself as solely an academic, that I've lived in community and with community, not separate from community from an extractive way. So that's something I'm highly aware of. But again, writing and pulling this forward, it's like I was able to put some of my own recipes in it that I've kind of co-evolved with, right? Like I've co-evolved, like the plants I got to pick were plants I love, like plants that like are familiar to me, that that could be found across, like to find commonality across space. With foraging, plants follow people and people follow plants. There's this symbiotic relationship. We follow availability of resources, water, plants, materials for food, water, and shelter. And that's been happening since we've been migrating all over this terrestrial space. So urban foraging for me was that permission slip to step more fully into that path. I feel it's less of a tactical foraging guide. So if you use that to forage, it's not going to suit. I don't feel it would suit fully all the needs of, like, I look at your bookshelf, like my bookshelves of plant books. Just it takes a lot of knowledge to fill like your brain.
And everyone's going to have a particular plant. What are some of your favorite recipes that you share in that book that we should try?
Yeah, I mean, the apple butter is the chutneys.
Apple butter, the chutneys.
Yeah. All the fruits and tart tatans. This is really, I think what's really fun is and when I said, let's talk about the forgotten plants.
Yeah.
Acorn bread, for example. People are like, oh my gosh, you can eat those. It's like, yes, not only can we eat those, but for 10,000 years, North America indigenous people have relied on the quercus and the acorn nut as a primary carbohydrate for their sustenance for the entire year. So the acorn harvest happens, not the only nut, large, just like squirrels, that made up for large portions of the diets for indigenous communities. The same thing with the chestnuts, and like they play a role in the diet. And I think that, but with the acorn specifically, because it's such a neglected food, it's not even a neglected food. We look at it as food, right? We drive over the nuts with our cars, so like the walnut tree, right? Like these nuts will just fall from trees, and we don't even register it as something that can nourish us. Right. So concerned with going to the grocery store for things wrapped in plastic. We don't even know what. And so when forgotten isn't just like, oh, I forgot about this, but it's been forgotten for a few generations because of the industrialization of our food system.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so true. I mean, the acorn processing, there's a Brian Hamlet, and he does acorn processing in Asheville, and we're planning to go in August and do a video for members. But it's because for me, it's like I feel that it would be so helpful just to watch someone do it the first time because I feel like it's such a process. Like for the red oak, I mean, like if you have a white oak or the white oak Quercus species, it's easier, right, than like a red oak. I'm wondering because we have here live oak. We have Quercus virginiana, and they're very small.
It's interesting because a lot of my foraging and herbalism work happened alongside me raising my children. So really quickly, and one of the challenges we have today is that we do our foraging work. We have said a different way. Our family unit today on the whole in the West, particularly the United States, are at the individual household level. We no longer work in community to do these new traditions. And it's too laborious to do it, as generally it's women's work. And raising children. And I remember just 2 a.m. and I had a career with a large part outside of the home for a large part of raising my kids. So 2 a.m. here I am making raw milk cheese or doing all the canning that my mother had done for my children because it was really important to me. So when it comes to the goat tree, and so I also got really clear the things that I loved to make became my things.
Right. Not compromising.
Yeah, and then some of it is like, oh well, okay, then I'll go to the market for this, or you have to decide on your time, right? So this discussion around which acorn provides the most niche flavor, I got them time for that. All right, let's be honest. If I'm making acorn flour, I'm gonna find my spaces with the big fatty bur oaks or the big fatty white oak nuts, like it's got the most nut.
Right.
Yeah. No one's got time for the little red nuts. And so my cousin and I, he's a chemist in our family. He's our family winemaker, but he's very good with tannins, and he is like a chemist by training, but then also by flavor profile. So he'll be really precious to species and to flavor. And I'm like, Nathaniel, I don't have time for that. We're just gonna crack open the nuts, get them out of the nut, get them out of the shell, out of the hull, and put those nut meats into a water bath. If they're red, because I used to have a beautiful red oak, and then where I grew up on the lakeshore, tons of white oak, variety of white oaks, they all go into the same pot. They're all going to get, and then there's the discussion of a cold versus hot water leach process. Again, I don't have time for that. So they all go into one pot, shelled. I turn up the water and I just bring them to a boil. And this is how I've learned to do it. And it, in fact, has kind of created even a flavor profile for my acorn nut meats that I then grind into flour because I do prefer the hot process. I do prefer a more not just the white oak. Like if I wanted a really nice, approachable nut flour, I'd go for a chestnut flour. I want acorn to show up for me. And what I love about the acorn as well, that with its oils and with its tannins, you can even, after you leach them out a few times, to get them to be a bit more palatable, I roast them. I've actually then put them on drying sheets into a convection oven to slowly roast them, which then brings out the oils, just like you were roasting a coffee bean. So that for me, I've played around with it a little bit. Again, if you ask 10 foragers how they prefer to process their acorns, you're going to get 10 different answers.
Different ones. So you have to crack it, get it out of its shell, and then you boil it, and then what?
Then you can dry it. So you can do this a couple different ways. You can also put those nuts in a bucket and turn them over in cold water multiple times. But the leaching and to get the tannins out is going to take a bit longer. Then you can, after you drain off the nut meats, it depends on what you want to do with them and what kind of volume you have. Do you run out of time and have to just drain them off and put them in a Ziploc bag and throw them in the freezer? I've done that. It's like, Because at this point, you're probably 20 hours into a process between gathering the nuts, shelling the nuts by hand, if that's what you're doing, processing them either in a hot water bath or a cold water leach process. I've heard of people putting them in their toilet bowl tank. So as you flush, like if you were to put them in a pillowcase and flush them with the water running through it.
Oh my God, that's crazy.
But in processing olives and
Mm.
having California and doing the olive harvests, we had a small batch of trees where we actually gathered our olives, put them in salt and sea salt and pillowcases, and then tied them up in the trees during rainy season. And again, it takes the tannins out. It leaches those olives before then you can put them up into oil. So you could do your acorns that way. I'm almost going to guarantee the squirrels are going to get at them if you do
Right.
that. By the time you get those nut meat leached, if you want to dry them to then be able to grind into flour, you can go that way. They are dry the full nut. So then using a commercial type grinder is important, or a high grade coffee grinder is important because they're nuts, right? Then you're dealing with a food product that behaves like a coffee bean. And from there, you can grind them on demand. I don't prefer to, it's just like a coffee bean then. So if you grind your beans and have unground or ground flour, it's going to oxidize more quickly and can turn a bit more rancid.
The fat.
This is niche. No, it's niche.
It is. I'm so excited to learn, and thank you for sharing that with me because I want to do it one day, but I think I would love to do it with white oak if I could. If I lived in the mountains, I found opportunity. But here where I live in Charleston on the coast, there's just a lot of live oaks, and their acorns are so tiny. They're very
They are
small.
tiny.
So I don't know. Maybe there's a way to do it.
And I think what's important is to also guide your exploration by what's around you, right?
Yeah.
So if it's a place where oak isn't that prominent, that wouldn't necessarily be a feature of my teaching. It wouldn't be a feature. I think for me, it's just one of those plants that are trees that across most continents we revere as a great oak, right? A sturdy tree.
Yeah.
And again, going back to the concept of joy and delight, I'll bring along my breads, my foraged breads, or my tea cakes, or a acorn bread, or what have you, and offer samples. Or I'll make coffee, a coffee beverage from the acorn nut, and people will be really delighted. Something that gives you that surprise and joy. And common foods, right? Foods that are or plants that you might, and this is again back to that framework, as you start to recognize what's in your awareness, you start to see the different plants. You start to see the different trees that are maybe in the area that you exist. You might have a variety of pine. You might have evergreen. You might have a variety of juniper. You might have a variety of beech tree, right? Or walnut tree. And then depending on the time of year, that then is going to inform you what stage of.
Yes.
If you can forage like this, if it's winter time, right? So that's really then going to drive that curiosity of where is this in the stage? Can I eat the plant at this stage? Because not all plant parts are edible at all times of year, as we know.
Yes. Good advice to go with what you have. I think I want to learn acorn processing mostly for members that have the white oaks or just something new to teach them, and bringing in guest teachers. For those of you listening, like Lisa's saying, pay attention to what you have. So if you do have acorns, maybe Lisa is inspiring you to try it, because I do think it's one of those things that if you learn how to do, you can ensure that your community is going to have food, right? Because if we ever can't go to the grocery store, I think acorn processing is going to be very, very, very important. The fat, the carbohydrate, because we can forage usually greens everywhere. Greens are very easy to forage, but I feel like the carbohydrates and the fat is one of those things that for me It's really important to try and to learn from the landscape. So here too, we have smilax, we have the greenbrier, and the
Mhm.
indigenous women called it red flower. And I got to the very beginning of it where I was grading the roots and it was turning red and my hands were turning red. And then I like soaked it in water and it started to drop out. But then I didn't do the next step where you take the water off and you dry the starch. And so I have to do the next step. And I really need to, I feel like in my heart that that's something I really, really need to sit with and to learn from that plant because if my community can't go or this community can't go to the grocery store, Smilex is going to be a very important plant.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. And it's a plant that there are multiple uses. And this is where I think looking backward to look forward to understand how even today in our current herbalism practices and our current food practices, we don't have a really deep knowledge of how plants can be used in a myriad of ways. So when you start to talk about starch uses, right, extracting even the cast off water that can get boiled down to be even then used as a thickener. And not all plants can use. Sometimes you have to use that cast off water and just cast it off. But sometimes that water can be reserved for secondary uses. Like when I mentioned soaking the acorns and that leach off, I've been practicing with a foraged kombucha, acorn kombucha, and an acorn stout, right, with that cast off water to because it's got the retained fats and other things. And I'm not quite the beer I got down, the kombucha, I'm not quite there yet for distribution for recommendation. But, and
Yeah.
in the Netherlands, that fishing line and boat cordage for the ships actually historically were submerged and cured in the boiled hulls of acorns, because what it did, it would turn, if you ever see dock lines or what have you, as black, they've been boiled in these heavy vats. And then that leach of the acorn hulls actually then acts as an antifungal and preserves with its high tannins, like that rope cordage. So like we just don't, again, kind of even beyond food, we don't have that deep knowledge of how to use all of the plants. We might
Yeah.
just the farm to table knows the tail ethos of using an entire animal. Plants also can be used in multiple ways beyond just food and medicine, and also for multiple uses. We just don't, again, forgotten ways, traditional ways, craft heritage ways. We've forgotten these things because we've not needed to rely on them.
It's so true. And for you listening, it's important to form your own connections and new connections and then teach. And so I think it's really important to not always rely on the book.
And share within your own ecosystem. And it can be with your friend, it can be with your neighbor, it can be with somebody you don't even know.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing. So before we end, is there anything you want to tell the listeners in terms of sense of place or foraging or anything that you want to share before we wrap up? And then also share how people can find you.
Yeah, well, the framework of rooting, connecting to place, being aware of your surroundings. We talked a little bit about plant identification, being really clear before you harvest, not just as being able to properly identify different plant parts to confirm what you're going to gather before you gather is very important, not just from a beginner's perspective, but even as we go, always to remember to be in that place of awareness. We don't make a mistake because that's possible. And going then one step further, consider those water streams, potential contaminants in the soil. These are all very real things. We talked a lot about cautionary tales. I think what I want our listeners to go forward with is to have that sense of curiosity to mitigate those and to know that foraging will lead us to food sources that are nutrient dense and a broader diversity of foods than we'll ever find in the grocery store. And that becoming in relationship with these plants does put forward not just a healing relationship with these foods for our bodies, but it develops a relationship where those plants will continue forward to heal the earth in a way that they're supposed to. Our wetland habitat, our different plants play different roles for soil remediation, right? And that helps us, that relationship is foundational for the joy and the hope for us to have for the future generations that rely on this terrestrial space that we live in, currently hurtling through space all together on this one lovely planet we have. So.
Well said. Yes, thank you for sharing that wisdom. It is really important to make sure that we restore and conserve our co-evolved relationship with plants. So, because the benefits extend outside of us. So thank you. And what is the best way for people to connect with you?
On the socials, absolutely reach out on Facebook if you want to go ahead and put into the description. Facebook, Instagram, of course. Ever feel free to share my email. People have questions and queries. I'd love to hear stories. I love to hear how things might be inspiring to others. And of course, questions. Happy to share my expertise as it might suit for any of the listeners as well. And burdockandrose.com is the hub on the interwebs of
Burdock and Rose.
Burdock and Rose. That's I decided to really dive deep and connect as an herbalist and practitioner in my community. Burdock was there. So it's that people and plants partnership. So
nice. Well, I will put a link to Lisa's website, Burdock and Rose. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your time, Lisa, and for sharing your knowledge and your embodied wisdom. It's such a joy to meet you. And definitely go to the show notes so you can connect more with Lisa. And may you stay wild and stay human. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. Make sure you follow the Wild Herb Podcast so you can continually deepen your connection with wild plants and nature, the nature within and without. Stay wild and stay human.